The smell hit Roll first. Not smoke, not the usual burnt wire stench that had been filling the Unvol's corridors for the past 20 minutes. Something else. Something hot and alive and old, like stone left too long in a fire. She stopped at the entrance to hold 7 and pressed her back against the wall. Her hand found the panel beside the door and she checked the atmosphere readout. Breathable air, no toxins, but the temperature inside was 7 degrees higher than the rest of the ship, and rising. That made no sense. The hold had been sealed for 3 days. Behind her, the ship groaned. Deep in its belly, something shifted and cracked. The reactor was still venting. Life support on the rest of the Unvol had maybe 35 minutes left, and that number was going down. She pushed the door open anyway. The hold was dim, emergency lights only, casting everything in pale orange. Cargo crates were stacked along the walls, strapped down and silent. The lifeboat sat at the far end, docked to the hull, its hatch sealed, its running lights blinking steady green, ready, fueled, the one good thing left on this dying ship. And something was wrapped around it. Rull did not move, she did not breathe, she just looked. It was coiled with its back against the lifeboat hatch, both arms folded under its chest, its long neck curved low, scales the culk of old gold, catching the orange light and throwing it back warm and bright. One wing was tucked neatly against its side. The other was open, spread against the floor, and even from the doorway Rull could see the tear in it, a ragged split near the top joint, dark with dried blood. The creature's eyes were closed. It was the size of a large dog, maybe a little bigger. It was also, without any question or doubt, a dragon. Rull backed out of the hold slowly, let the door close behind her, and called Nadia on the come. "Captain, come to hold 7. "How bird?" "Hard to explain, just come." Nadia arrived in 90 seconds. Bren was with her, mudcut over one shoulder, because Bren always had his mudcut. Tala came behind them, tablet in hand. Then Suva, still pulling on his jacket. Then Drux, who looked like he had already decided to be angry about whatever he was about to see. Win was last, one hand resting near the sidearm at his hip, eyes moving over everything. Rull opened the door again and stood back. "Silence." The dragon was awake now. Its copper eyes were open and fixed on them, bright and sharp and very, very aware. It had not moved from the hatch. It pressed itself tighter against it instead, spread its good wings slightly, and made a sound low in its chest. Not a roar, more like the warning a fire makes when you get too close. "What," said Drux, "is that?" "I don't know," Tala whispered. She was already recording on her tablet, her voice barely a breath. "I don't know, nothing like this exists. Nothing. There are no records of." "It's sitting on our lifeboat," Drux said. "Yes," Nadia said. "It's sitting on our only lifeboat." "I can see that, Drux." Win had his weapon half out of the holster, not raised, just ready. Rull watched the dragon track the movement with its eyes. It did not flinch. It watched Win the way something watches a thing it has already decided it can handle. Bren stepped past Rull, just one step into the hold. He stopped there and crouched down, putting himself at a lower level than the dragon's head. "Its wing is hurt," he said quietly. "Bren," Nadia's voice carried a warning. "I can see infection from here. The edges of the tear are swollen." He did not go closer. He stayed crouched, looking. "It's not attacking, it's guarding. There's a difference." Drux turned to Nadia. "It doesn't matter what it's doing. We need that boat. We shoot it, we move it, we get on board, we go. 35 minutes. 33 now," Suva said quietly, looking at his wrist unit. Nadia stood in the doorway for a long moment. She looked at the dragon. The dragon looked back at her with those copper eyes, steady and burning and afraid in a way it was trying very hard to hide. She had commanded the Unvol for 6 years. She had made bad calls and good ones and calls she still thought about at 300 hours when she could not sleep. She knew what a cornered creature looked like. She knew what it meant when something stopped running and started holding ground. She also knew what Drux was saying was not wrong. "No one fires," she said. Drux made a sound. "I said no one fires." She looked at Win. He put the weapon back in the holster. She looked at Bren. You have 33 minutes. Figure it out. Bren nodded. He sat down cross-legged on the floor just inside the door, set his mudcut beside him, and looked at the dragon. The dragon looked back. The ship groaned again around them. Somewhere aft, something exploded softly, like a sigh. The hold lights flickered once and held. 32 minutes. Nobody left the corridor. That was the first strange thing. Nadia had not ordered them to stay. She had told them to figure it out, and that meant Bren, not all 7 of them standing in a half-circle outside, hold 7 watching a medic sit on the floor and talk to a creature that had no right to exist. And yet none of them walked away, not even Drux. Tala had her tablet up, recording audio and every reading the ship's sensors could give her. She had pulled up 3 different xenobiology databases in the first 2 minutes. All 3 said the same thing in different ways, no known species matching this description. Scaled, winged, thermogenic, bilateral symmetry with a secondary limb configuration suggesting. She stopped reading the auto-analysis and just watched instead. The hatchling had not moved from the hatch. It tracked Bren the way a cat tracks something it has not yet decided about. Its good wing shifted slowly up and down like a slow breath. The torn wing lay flat on the floor. Even from the doorway, Tala could see it was bad. The tissue around the tear was dark and tight. The scales near it lifted wrong. The creature was in pain and had been in pain for a while. It was simply choosing not to show it. Bren was talking. He had been talking since he sat down, low and even, not loud enough for the crew to hear the words clearly. Just sound. Just a human voice doing what human voices do when they want something scared to understand that they are not a threat. Sava ran numbers quietly on his wrist unit. He showed them to Rull. She looked at the figures, then she looked at the hold, then she went to the corridor panel and started working. Drux moved next to her. What are you doing? Rerouting heat from the secondary conduits. The hold is cold. It's cold and the thing is injured, and cold makes infection worse. She did not look up from the panel. Also, it stopped trying to roast Bren when the temperature went up, so I'm going to keep doing it. Drux looked at the dragon. He looked at Rull. You're warming up the room for it. I'm warming up the room so the medic doesn't get burned, yes. Drux pressed his mouth shut and said nothing. The hold temperature climbed 2 degrees. The hatchling's chest rumble lowered half a note, not gone, but lower. 26 minutes. Sava came to stand beside Tala. I ran the numbers, he said quietly. And if we rush it, best case, 2 people hurt, 6 minutes lost minimum. That puts us at 20 minutes for 7 people to board and seal and launch. That's possible but close. He paused. Worst case, 1 person doesn't make it to the boat, and we still have the same 20 minutes. Tala looked at him. So the math says don't rush it. The math says Bren's approach has a better expected outcome. Barely, but better. Don't tell Drux the math, Tala said. I told Drux the math. They both looked at Drux, who was standing with his arms crossed, watching Bren, jaw tight. He had heard. He had done the same numbers in his head and reached the same place and hated it there. Inside the hold, Bren had stopped talking. He reached slowly into his mudcut, pulled out a small heat pack and cracked it. It glowed orange in his palm, warm to the touch. He held it out, not toward the dragon, just held it up where the dragon could see it. Then he set it on the floor in front of him and left it there. The hatchling's eyes went to the heat pack. It did not move toward it, but it looked. It looked for a long time. Its nostrils moved. Then it exhaled slow and low. Not flame, just heat. The air above its nose shimmered. It smelled it, Tala breathed. It knows what warmth is. It's associating. Bren slid the heat pack 6 inches forward. Then he waited. The hatchling watched the pack, watched Bren, watched the pack. 22 minutes. Drux made a low sound in his throat. Nadia looked at him. He shook his head, not angry now. Just tight with the particular stress of a person who knows they are out of options and does not like it. If this doesn't work, he said very quietly, I'm not going to say I told you so. I just want that acknowledged in advance. Noted, Nadia said. Good, he uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. Is it moving? Everyone leaned slightly. The hatchling had lifted its head, not to lunge, just to look more directly at Bren, at a new angle, head tilted like it was solving something. Then Bren did something none of them expected. He slid the entire medkit across the floor slowly toward the hatchling, not close, halfway between them, and then he opened his hands, both of them, palms up, empty, and held them out in the open air. Nothing in his hands, nothing threatening, just a man sitting on the floor of a dying ship with his palms up, waiting. The hatchling stared at his hands for a long moment. Its wings shifted, just slightly. The rumble in its chest did not stop, but it changed. 20 minutes. Rael looked at the temperature readout. She looked at Bren. She looked at the dragon, which was still pressed against the hatch, still hurting, still afraid, still not moving. She pushed the heat up one more degree. Come on, she said, to no one, to the ship, to whatever had put them all here in this broken hold at the end of everything. Come on. 4 meters. That was the distance between Bren and the hatchling now. He had closed it one slow shuffle at a time over the past 7 minutes, stopping each time the dragon's chest sound rose in pitch, waiting until it dropped again, then moving a little more. He was still sitting cross-legged on the floor. He had not stood up once. Tala had joined him without asking permission. She had walked in quietly, sat down beside him, and opened her tablet on her knee, screen dimmed to almost nothing. The hatchling had watched her come in, gone rigid for one tense moment, then settled again. 2 humans on the floor were apparently acceptable. It had drawn its line, and they were still behind it. 19 minutes. Wynne came to stand at the doorway, arms loose at his sides. He was not reaching for anything. He had put himself there as a quiet wall between what was happening inside and the corridor, in case someone in the corridor did something with their hands they shouldn't. Drek stood behind him, watching. Inside the hold, Bren finally let himself get a proper look at the wing. The tear ran from the top joint down about 1/3 of the membrane. The edges had dried shut in a way that looked like healing, but wasn't. The tissue was pulling tight instead of knitting, and the discoloration spreading from it was the color of bad things. The hatchling was compensating by keeping the wing flat and still, which helped with pain but was making the pull worse. It needed to be cleaned, wrapped. Given time, it probably didn't have. Bren reached slowly into his medkit. He moved the way he moved in surgery, deliberate, no wasted motion, no surprises. He pulled out a small cloth roll and set it on the floor where the hatchling could see it. Then antiseptic spray, then a length of soft binding. He laid them out one at a time, in a line, each one a few inches apart. The hatchling watched every item come out of the bag. It did not make a sound. Tala was recording everything. She pulled up a signal analysis tool on her tablet and ran the hatchling's chest sound through it, live, watching the waveform. The sound was not one thing, it had layers, low and high woven together, changing constantly, not random, structured. She had seen this kind of structure before in complex language families that used tone as grammar. She did not say this out loud. She wrote it into her notes instead in small letters with a shaking hand. Then the hatchling did something. It turned its head toward the lifeboat hatch directly behind it. It opened its mouth slightly, and without moving its body at all, it breathed out a thin, controlled jet of flame. Not much, not hot enough to damage. It hit the surface of the hatch and left a mark, dark and deliberate, about the size of a fist. Then it turned back and looked at them. The silence in the hold was complete. Tala pulled the image up on her tablet and magnified it. The mark was not a burn pattern from random flame. The lines were too clean, the curves too considered. It was a shape, not a letter from any system she knew, but a shape with intention behind it, a symbol. It made a mark, she said, barely audible. I see it, Bren said. That's not instinct, that's communication. Bren looked at the hatchling. The hatchling looked back at him with those copper eyes, unblinking, and something in its expression, if a dragon could have an expression, was waiting, like it had said something and expected an answer. Bren picked up the antiseptic spray from the floor. held it up so the hatchling could see it. Then he pointed, gently, slowly, at the torn wing. The hatchling followed where he pointed. Its chest sound changed again. 17 minutes. Outside, Drex exhaled through his nose. Tala, that mark on the hatch, can you read it? No. Best guess. She looked at the magnified image on her screen. The shape had a central vertical line with two curves branching from the top, like something reaching out or holding on. If I had to guess, she said slowly, it's a claim mark. This is mine, or this is safe, one of the two. So it wasn't attacking the lifeboat, Wynne said. It was protecting it, Nadia said from the back of the corridor. She had not moved from where she stood, but her voice was clear and quiet. Same as us. Nobody answered that. There was nothing wrong with the answer. Inside the hold, the hatchling did something small. It shifted its body, not away from the hatch. It did not give up the hatch, but it moved its left side forward, turning slightly, and the gap between its flank and the hatch handle opened, not wide, barely a person's width, just enough. It did not move back. It looked at Bren, then at the gap, then at Bren again. Did it just? Sivo started. Yes, Rail said. Bren looked at the gap. He looked at the hatchling's torn wing, still laid flat on the floor, still pulling wrong at the joint. He looked at the medkit supplies he had laid out on the floor in a careful line. Then he picked up the antiseptic and the cloth roll together and held them in one hand, and with his other hand he pointed again at the wing. The hatchling did not move, but it did not close the gap. 16 minutes. Bren, Nadia said from the doorway, calm, even, just his name. I know, he said, I know how much time we have. He did not stand up yet. He waited one more moment, watching the hatchling, letting it watch him, letting it make the next choice on its own. Because that was the thing about frightened creatures, it didn't matter how safe you were. What mattered was whether they believed it. The hatchling lowered its head slightly. Not a bow, just a lowering, just a fraction of the distance between them closed. Bren got to his feet. Bren did not rush. That was the thing Rail would remember later, when she tried to explain it to people who hadn't been there. The ship had 15 minutes of breathable air. Their only lifeboat was behind a dragon, and Bren walked toward it like he was crossing a room to pour himself a drink. He kept the antiseptic and the cloth roll in one hand. He kept his other hand open and visible. He moved at an angle, slightly to the side of the hatchling rather than straight at it, giving it room to watch him come without feeling cornered. Every few steps he stopped, let the dragon read him, then moved again. The hatchling tracked him the whole way with those copper eyes. Its chest sound was low and continuous, like an engine idling. It did not raise its wing. It did not open its mouth. When Bren was close enough, he crouched down beside the torn wing and waited one more moment. Then he got to work. The hatchling flinched when the antiseptic hit the tier. Its whole body went rigid and a sharp sound came out of it, high and short. Bren kept his hands moving, steady and practiced, not stopping, because stopping is what makes animals panic and panic is what gets people killed. He cleaned the wound. He laid the binding on gently, not tight, just covering, just protection. The hatchling's sound dropped back to the low idle. 14 minutes. Bren stood up and stepped back. He looked at the hatchling and then at the hatch and then at the crew in the doorway. Nadia walked in first. She walked directly to the hatch, reached past the hatchling's flank, her arm less than a hand's width from its scales, and gripped the handle. The hatchling's head turned to follow her. Its eyes moved from her face to her arm to the handle. It did not move. Nadia pulled the hatch open. Rail, she said. Rail came in, no hesitation. She looked the hatchling in the eye as she passed it, the way she looked at everything that was in her way, not hostile, just clear, and stepped through the hatch into the lifeboat. She went straight to the pilot controls and started the ignition sequence. Tala, Nadia said. Tala came in, tablet pressed to her chest, eyes on the hatchling the whole way. She stopped for just a second beside it, close enough to see the binding on the wing, and something crossed her face that was not fear. Then she moved through the hatch. Sivo! Sivo came in fast. He was scared and not hiding it well, but he came in. Win! Win walked through without drama, professional to the end. 5 in, Nadia was at the hatch, 2 left in the corridor. Drex stepped into the hold. He moved the way a man moves when he knows everyone is watching and he doesn't want them to see him be afraid. Slow and deliberate. He got to the hatch, reached it, stopped. He turned and looked at the hatchling from a distance of about 1 meter. The hatchling looked back. Drex opened his mouth, closed it. Then he said to no one in particular, "You're going to get everyone killed." He looked at Bren, who was still standing beside the creature. "You know that, right?" Bren said, "Maybe, get on the boat." Drex got on the boat. 11 minutes. Bren was alone in the hold with the hatchling. He looked at the wing, at the clean binding on it. He looked at the mark the hatchling had burned into the hatch door. He looked at the creature itself, which had stayed exactly where it was through all of this, watching humans file past it one at a time, and had not moved, had not struck, had done nothing except hold its ground and let them through. Okay, Bren said to himself, to the dragon, to the universe that had decided to put all of this in front of him on a Tuesday. He stepped through the hatch. The thump came before Nadia sealed it. She had her hand on the door, and then something hit the outer frame, not hard, not violent, just a thump, and she looked back through the gap. The hatchling had moved from the lifeboat hatch for the first time since any of them had found it. It was standing in front of the door now, its injured wing folded tight, its good wing half open. It was not blocking them. It was just there, looking at Bren through the gap with those copper eyes. Bren looked at Nadia. Nadia looked at the countdown on the hull panel outside, 10 minutes 30 seconds. She looked at the interior of the lifeboat, 7 humans, 1 dragon-shaped problem, 1 question. The question answered itself. "Move over," Nadia said. It took 4 of them, Bren, Win, Rail, and Drex, who swore under his breath the entire time, to get the hatchling through the hatch. It didn't fight them. It also didn't help. It was heavy in the way that living things are heavy, all dense muscle and scale, and the wing had to be guided through carefully. They lay it along the back wall of the boat, which left very little room for anyone else's legs, but legs could be arranged. The hatch sealed. The Ironville made one last sound, deep and final, the sound of a ship giving up its last breath. The lifeboat kicked free. Through the small rear viewport, they watched the Ironville break apart. It went quietly, the way exhausted things go. No explosion, just pieces separating slowly in the dark, catching starlight as they drifted. Drex was watching too, from his cramped position near the wall. He said nothing, for once. The hatchling was pressed against the warm back panel, its tail curled over someone's boot, its eyes half closed. Its chest was still making that low sound. In the silence of the boat, now that the ship was gone and the countdown had stopped and there was nothing left to be urgent about, it almost sounded like something restful. Almost like a hum. 60 hours to the relay beacon, Rail said from the pilot's seat. Nobody answered, nobody needed to. They were out, they were alive, all 8 of them. Hour 1 was the hardest. The lifeboat was designed for 8 humans. It had not been designed for 7 humans and 1 juvenile dragon, which occupied the space of roughly 2 humans if it stayed curled, and roughly 3 if it decided to adjust its tail, which it did often and without warning. By hour 2, everyone had learned to keep their legs pulled in. The temperature in the boat settled at slightly warmer than ideal for humans and apparently perfect for the hatchling, which had tucked itself against the rear panel and not moved except to breathe. Drex had lodged a complaint about the temperature in hour 1. Nobody acted on it. He lodged a second complaint in hour 3. Nadia told him to find a corner and stay in it, which he did, which was difficult because the corners were already occupied. The wing was Bren's first real problem. The binding he had put on in the hold was temporary, field work. The tissue under it needed to be properly cleaned and set, or the infection would spread, and a spreading infection in a creature of unknown biology on a 60-hour lifeboat ride was the kind of problem that solved itself badly. He talked Tala through holding a light while he worked. He talked Wynn through handing him supplies in the right order. He did not talk Drex through anything because Drex had said he wasn't helping. Drex held the tail so the hatchling couldn't thrash when the deep cleaning started. He did not acknowledge doing this. He simply appeared at the right end of the dragon and held on with both hands, jaw set, eyes on the ceiling, for the full 40 minutes it took Bren to finish. When it was done, the hatchling lay very still. It was exhausted. Bren could tell by the way its breathing had changed, slower, heavier, the intervals between each rise of its chest growing longer. "Is it?" Sivo started. "Sleeping," Bren said, "or the closest thing to it." Sivo let out a long breath. Tala spent the first 20 hours of the journey doing almost nothing but working. She had hours of audio recorded. She had visual data, thermal readings, the chemical composition of the small amounts of flame it had produced, the structure of the mark it had burned into the hatch. She ran the audio through every analytical tool the tablet could manage and built a frequency map of the sounds it had made, tagging each one against the behavior that preceded it. By hour 15, she had a working theory. She did not want to say it out loud, because saying it out loud would make her sound like a person who had lost a significant amount of rationality. Nadia found her sitting with her back against the wall at hour 18, staring at the tablet. "Tell me," Nadia said. Tala showed her the frequency maps. The sounds it makes aren't random, and they're not just emotional. They're structured. The same structures appear in the same contexts with a consistency it's too high to be coincidence. She pointed to a cluster of waveforms. This one only appears when it's looking at Bren. This one appears when something moves near the wing. This one appeared right before it made the mark on the hatch. Nadia studied the screen. "You think it's language?" "I think it's the beginning of language, or the end of one. I don't know which direction it's going." Tala looked at the sleeping hatchling. "I think it's young. I think it's very young. And I think it came from somewhere that no ship we know of has ever been." "The cargo manifest didn't list it," Nadia said. "No, it didn't." Tala paused. "Someone loaded it or it loaded itself. Neither option is simple." At hour 22, Sivo discovered that the hatchling liked lights. It started because his wrist unit blinked a blue notification and the hatchling's head came up fast, eyes fixed on the blue blink. Sivo looked at the creature, looked at his wrist, and blinked the light again. The hatchling tilted its head. Sivo blinked a pattern, 3 short, 1 long. The hatchling watched. Then it breathed out a small pulse of flame, 3 short flares, 1 longer. Sivo stared. He did it again, different pattern, long, long, short. The hatchling answered, long, long, short. "It's copying me," Sivo said, voice strange. "It's matching you," Tala corrected from across the boat, not looking up. "Copying implies mimicry, that implies conversation." Sivo played patterns with it for 2 hours. It never got one wrong. Hour 40. Bren was half asleep against the wall, legs stretched out, head back. The hatchling had migrated during the night. No one had seen it move, but it had, and was now curled partially against his side. The unbandaged wing laid across his lap like it had landed there by accident. It weighed more than it looked. His leg was going to be asleep for days. The hatchling made a sound. Bren opened his eyes. The sound came again, low and complex, several tones layered. A shape that repeated twice, not the warning sound, not the pain sound, not the one it made when Sivo blinked lights at it. Something new, something that started on a high note and ended long and low and deliberate. Tala was already recording. She played it back at a slower speed. The structure inside it became clearer. "It's a name," she said very quietly, "or what functions as one." It said it twice, same shape both times. "It's giving you something to call it." Bren looked at the hatchling. "Can I say it?" he asked Tala. "You can try." He tried. His human throat mangled it completely. 2 of the tones were not sounds a human face could make. The hatchling looked at him. Then it made a sound that was, structurally, very similar to the sound Tala had identified as amusement. Its chest shook once, twice. "It's laughing at you," Drex said from his corner. "Good," Bren said. At hour 55, without announcement, Drex picked up one of his ration packs and dropped it near the hatchling's nose. He walked back to his corner and sat down with his arms crossed. The hatchling sniffed it, ate it in 2 bites. Drex looked at the ceiling. "Don't read into this," he said to the room, to no one, to himself mostly. Nobody said anything. The boat hummed through the dark. Somewhere ahead, the beacon was waiting. The beacon answered on the 59th hour. Rail had been at the controls for most of the journey, sleeping in 2-hour blocks and waking up to check systems that didn't need checking. When the rescue vessel's signal came back, clean and strong, arrival in 6 hours, all 7 crew members confirmed safe, she relayed it to the cabin without standing up. Nadia sat with the incident report for a long time before she filed it. The report had required fields designed by people who had planned for fire, hull breach, reactor failure, navigational error, crew injury, and a few categories of mechanical disaster, so unlikely they had names in the database that nobody ever used. There was no field for this. She filled in the closest ones. Under passenger manifest, she listed 7 names. Under additional cargo recovered, she wrote 1 line: juvenile creature, non-catalogued species, status undetermined. Then she deleted that last part and wrote, status crew. She filed it. The rescue vessel's captain, a man named Obi, who had been running recovery operations for 11 years and believed himself to have seen everything that deep space had left to show him, read the report in silence. His second officer read it over his shoulder and asked what a non-catalogued species was. Obi said he had no idea. He sent a confirmation of receipt to the Ironville crew and asked 1 question: is it dangerous? Nadia sent back 1 answer: only if you're stupid about it. He did not ask any more questions. He decided he would see for himself. When the rescue ship docked and the hatch opened, the Ironville crew came through in 1s and 2s, carrying almost nothing because there was almost nothing left to carry. The rescue team was ready with blankets and medical kits, and the particular careful efficiency of people trained to help survivors. They counted off crew members as they came through. Then the hatchling stepped out. It had to angle its shoulders to fit through the hatch. Its good wing was half spread for balance, and the bandaged one was held flat against its side. It stopped in the docking corridor and looked at the new humans, the rescue team, Obi, his second officer, 4 medics with very wide eyes, and its chest sound filled the space, low and complex. Bren stepped up beside it. It moved its head so that the side of its neck pressed once against his shoulder. A brief thing, deliberate. Obi looked at Bren. Bren looked at Obi. "It saved the lifeboat for us," Bren said. "We saved it right back. That's the whole story." Obi was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his team and told them to make room. The galaxy found out about the hatchling within days of the crew reaching the nearest station. Tala's recordings went to the Xenobiology Council as a professional submission, documented, annotated, cross-referenced. The Council's response was the word unprecedented, followed by 3 pages of questions, followed by an emergency session that ran 14 hours and produced no conclusions. 7 research bodies wanted access. 2 governments filed formal requests for custody. A university in the outer systems offered to house the creature in a facility that Tala read the description of and called, politely, a cage. Nadia's response to all formal requests was the same. 4 words, plain text, no header. It chose us first. Legal proceedings began. They were expected to last years. In the meantime, the crew was quarantined on the station for debriefing, standard procedure after a ship loss, and the hatchling was given a temperature-controlled room that Rail spent 2 days reinforcing with extra insulation panels because the station's standard heating was inadequate, and she had opinions about inadequate heating. The hatchling would eat only if Bren brought the food. It would allow scans only if Tala was in the room. It tolerated the station medics if they moved slowly and said nothing sudden. It had decided that Drex was a problem to be studied. It watched him with focused attention every time he entered the room, tracking his movements with the precise attention of a creature running calculations. Drex maintained that this was uncomfortable. He came to the room every day anyway. Sivo taught it a new light pattern game using the room's adjustable wall panels. It won more than it lost. When it won, the chest sound it made was the same structured sequence Tala had identified weeks ago on the lifeboat, the one that showed up at the same frequency as what humans might call satisfaction. Tala kept working. She built a partial map of the hatchling's sound system, not a translation, nothing so clean as that, but a sketch, a rough shape of meaning. She found 43 distinct patterns that appeared consistently enough to be structural. She was fairly certain the mark it had burned into the lifeboat hatch was related to the sounds it made when it pressed against Bren in the docking corridor. She had a word for what it might mean. She kept that word in her notes for now. It felt too large to say out loud. Outside the station, the galaxy was having arguments about jurisdiction and biology and precedent, and what this meant for a dozen different treaties, and how a creature that did not exist could have ended up in the cargo hold of a freight ship, and whether the crew could legally be considered its guardians or whether it needed a different legal category entirely. None of this reached the hatchling's room in any form that mattered. What reached the room was Bren arriving every morning with food, Tala arriving with her tablet, Rail checking the heating panels, Sivo with his lights, Win sitting quietly in the corner because he had decided the creature deserved at least one person in the room who did not want anything from it. Drex watched carefully from across the space, still pretending he was only there because he had nowhere else to be. The hatchling slept, pressed against the warm wall rail, had reinforced. It breathed in the low, slow rhythm of something that was not afraid anymore. Across 1,000 species, in 100 wars and treaties, nobody had ever managed to put into words what made humanity strange. They had tried. They had said, stubborn or reckless or too attached to things that couldn't be explained by survival math. They had not been wrong. They had just been looking at it too small. Humanity did not leave wounded things alone in the dark. Not when it was easy, not when it was hard, not when the clock was at 32 minutes and the air was running out and the thing in the way was impossible by every record they had. Not ever. Not even then. Especially then.